All right, here we are. We're here together again to be able to explore what you need to empower your child, a child, any child that you care about to overcome the challenges that you're faced with. The important thing is that we know that there's hope. There's real passion for us to be together on this journey because so often in this world, we're given ideas about what a child can and cannot do through the lens of something like ADHD and other types of challenges or disorders. Even though that has the appearance of wisdom, I'm here to tell you that when we get an opportunity to explore together accurate information below the surface, things can look quite different. And that's very powerful. My name is AJ McMahon. And what's your name? Maybe you can type your first name in the chat, or maybe later you can let me know your name because you're important. The child that you are raising, the child that you work with, the child that you get a chance to influence in your life, all those children are so important that it makes our opportunity today worth it. It is worth it because have we need to empower them truly, not just go along with the rhetoric and the hype and the beliefs that seem like empowerment, but that are really stealing the opportunity for growth, power, and amazing abilities that they have. You may think I'm talking about certain groups of children that are mislabeled with ADHD, but I'm really talking about children across the board because as we look at ADHD from an accurate perspective, from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders by the American Psychiatric Association, which houses the only diagnostic criteria for ADHD that we've been studying. When we look at actual historical events in history as it flows forward, not the narrative of ADHD, excuse me, going backwards, because most of the time when historical information is shared about ADHD, it is from the narrative today flowing backwards. Take another listen. Listen closely. Listen with your wisdom. You are not sheep. You are people that are intelligent. Why am I saying this? Because you know this, right? But when we look at a lot of information, it is pumped out in a way that I think really takes for granted that we are going to bring our wisdom, our skepticism, and our critical eye to something. Because I really want you to do that in this journey together with anything I present and anything that's presented to you. Go back and look at your favorite source of information about ADHD with a critical eye. Take off the lens of the narrative of ADHD and just look at the information for what it is. Is someone telling you what ADHD is, or are they pulling out an actual source, a verified, substantive source, and sharing from that point of view? When I said verified and substantive, because we can pull out a source for just about anything, right? You probably have come across some things that, I remember one time hearing about a study that informed people that water was bad for us. Things like that are out there. People, we know this. We run into these things all the time. But what we do get an opportunity to do is to look at something through a lens of a critical eye, through a lens of wisdom, and be able to examine it and say, okay, let me be able to vet this a little bit. Let me be able to find other corroborating information, other research studies, other things that back this up, because that's when we're going to get a clearer picture of what's what, and not just the narrative, not just the overview, the glossy, shiny information that kind of says, yeah, this is confirming our beliefs of what we've already heard, but what is really there? When you look at something in history, again, is someone just sometimes they can't talk, right? But that's okay. We're human. We don't have to be perfect. We just strive for excellence. And in this excellent journey for you and me, we get an opportunity to look at something like a historical account and look at it in context, not someone just pulling out a line from something and saying this is what it meant or this is what the author was writing. But what was the author writing in context? What was the story in context? What was the historical account flowing forward, not flowing backwards from the narrative lens of what ADHD is today? Because you get a chance. The whole thing is about you having an opportunity to look at the accurate information and make your own decisions. That's what it's all about. For you to make informed decisions for yourself and your child. And I hope that in this journey, some of the things that we talk about will shake maybe some of the things that you have been led to believe about ADHD. Why is that important? Because I believe breaking down the foundations of the narrative is going to create the opportunity for a new foundation of empowerment for your child to be able to help your child have a life that you can't even may not even be able to dream of right now. That is possible because I've seen it personally and professionally as a licensed professional counselor in the state of Arkansas. But I don't really come to you as a licensed professional. I come to you as a parent. I come to you as a man who has two children that I've been blessed with. I've been blessed with a daughter who's 20 years old in college, and I've been blessed with a son that's 6 years old in kindergarten. Yes, college and kindergarten, right? Here we go, the ways of life, right? This very journey that we're on. But one thing that doesn't vary is my love for them. The same way that your love, your compassion, your care for your child or any child that you may be thinking of, that is why we're here. We're here because we love and we have hope, and beyond maybe the scope of hope, which is dope. I just threw that in, but is something greater for your child that is real, but it's not real without the accurate information of ADHD from the diagnostic, the DSM, the only source of diagnostic criteria for, about ADHD, the historical and the scientific lens accurately. I don't know if that made any sense, but we're live. We're just going with it. Because what does make sense is that you have the power and the wisdom to discern for yourself. And that's what this is about, great discernment. So without further ado, we're going to launch into the DSM. This is part 3. I hope you can look in the description and see the links for part 1 and part 2. This is the final opportunity today. That didn't make any sense. This is the final part. There we go. This is the final part of this series of accurate information from the DSM. And this may be challenging. And the reason why I want this to be challenging is because I believe in you. I believe in your ability to see through the narrative, to find truth, to be able to put together a plan and empower your child or any child you care about, a child, many children, to become what they are truly capable of. And this is why we're going to go back into the DSM today. I have been using the DSM 5. The latest version is the DSM 5 TR, which I believe was published in 2020. That's the latest version. TR stands for text revision. I have that version on my computer, so bear with me today as I may not be looking directly at you, but looking down at my screen. That's because we want to use the latest version of the DSM today. Why are we doing that today where we use the DSM-5 in previous parts? What I shared with you in previous parts from the DSM-5 was pretty much the same as the DSM-5 TR. However, when I was reviewing, restudying this section that we're going to talk about today, as we continue with the diagnostic criteria of ADHD in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders by the American Psychiatric Association, the DSM, we want to look at the latest version of the DSM-5 TR because it has a significant difference in one of the categories that we're going to share. And I think this difference may be eye-opening. I know it was for me. So I hope that we can walk through this together today. So as we go into the DSM, as I pull it up here, All right, let's look at some sections today. Why is this important? Because a lot of times when it comes to diagnosing the ADHD. Well, what I mean is when it comes to diagnosing ADHD, when professionals, whether that's anyone that's trained and authorized to diagnose ADHD from the DSM, that can be your medical doctor, that can be a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a licensed counselor like myself, a licensed clinical social worker. It's someone that has been trained, licensed, and authorized to diagnose from the DSM. As I've shared in previous videos, anyone that's been trained, licensed, and authorized, you will do this. Whoa, I don't know if I'm doing some kind of karate move. I talk with my hands. Wah, wah, wah. But anyway, anybody that's been trained, licensed, and authorized to diagnose from the DSM is on the same playing field as far as their authority to diagnose from the DSM. And I indicate that because sometimes it could be like, well, this person's got this license, then that means that they have more authority. But anyone who is licensed has the same authority to diagnose from the DSM, or licensed and authorized to diagnose from the DSM. Those who are not licensed and authorized do not have authority to diagnose your child. Okay. So I know there are people out there indicating that, well, your child probably has this or your child probably has that. And they likely mean well, but you want to find not only someone licensed and authorized from the DSM, but you also want to be able to find someone who truly understands children. Because the major problem that we have in all of this is that we are told to see children through the lens of the narrative of ADHD instead of being taught to see ADHD through the lens of truly understanding children. The fundamental gap, the distance is vast. It is important that we build a bridge to understanding, to growth of children. So you want to find a professional that not only understands and has studied the DSM, not only has a license, not only is authorized, but how well do they truly understand children? Not just the symptoms, not just what they're going through, but the great discernment, because the DSM actually encourages incredible discernment. It seems like when it comes to ADHD, the diagnosis is with a big old mallet, a big old net. But when we look at it accurately from the DSM, we find that we need a scalpel. We need something of great discernment. Why is that? Well, let's get into this and talk about this in our journey today. You ready? All right, here we go. I said without further ado a while ago, I blew that out of the water. Further ado is an old term. It just sounds cool, maybe, but let's go with it. And actually not ado anymore. Ado. Okay, so here we go. Or do anymore? Do I don't know. Anyway, let's throw that out. Let's go. Okay, so we get into the DSM-5 TR today. All right, because beyond the symptoms, there's so much more to the criteria of diagnosing ADHD. Okay. All right. What are we going to talk about today in the DSM-5 TR? All right, let's go to diagnostic features. Okay, all this is under ADHD. All this in the ADHD criteria is meant to be taken as a whole. So, further with diagnostic features, this is what the DSM-5 TR shares. The essential feature of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, is a persistent pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development. Mind blowing, right? You guys are like, I am on this live video. I am watching this so that ADHD, so that AJ, so that AJ can tell me something that I already know. No, what we're looking at is that the DSM describes ADHD, but notice what it doesn't indicate. It doesn't indicate that ADHD is a brain that, think about when you're told about what ADHD is. what is communicated. How often are you told that it's something to do with the, you know, differences, the divergences, the something to do with the brain? But it's important to remember, as we discussed in previous videos, the only connection with the brain that the DSM makes is that in the introduction, it is shared that the writers in the DSM-5 and with the DSM-5 TR, they made sure they put in the DSM in the introduction the fact that they placed ADHD in the section of neurodevelopmental disorders because they had to make a judgment about where to put it based on, and I quote, incomplete or more often conflicting data. ADHD is not linked to or in the neurodevelopmental section, which the neurodevelopmental section links it to the brain because of because the World Health Organization and the leaders in the American Psychiatric Association who put together or worked on the diagnostic criteria and on the International Classification of Diseases, they did not indicate ADHD as a neurodevelopmental disorder based on neuroscience, based on a strong consensus of what ADHD is and that it is linked to the brain. They placed it in the section because they had to make a judgment about where to put it based on incomplete or more often conflicting data. But the same data supported strong arguments to place it in the behavioral disorder category. Behavior disorder, no brain, nor developmental brain. That's the only thing that indicates that ADHD is connected to the brain in the DSM really is that it is under the category of neurodevelopmental disorders. We've talked about how it got there because when you look at the criteria for ADHD, it doesn't say anything about the brain. It says that the essential feature is the struggle. ADHD is real because of the struggles with inattention, with hyperactivity and impulsivity, what someone is experiencing. ADHD is not the answer, as in it is because of these things in the brain. ADHD is the question. Well, what is called ADHD is a question. What is causing these struggles? Because the DSM indicates that it takes great discernment to understand that there can be more than 20 different reasons why a person may be having these symptoms. The DSM indicates that. So let's go on to be able to look at that from the DSM. Before we get there, well, no, let's go there now. Okay. Also, later in as we look at the criteria for the DSM, there's a section in the DSM-5 TR, and it's called differential diagnoses. Now, why is this section important? Because in this section of differential diagnoses, the DSM lists 16 different categories. I'm going to read a few. There's 16, there's a lot. So, oppositional defiant disorder, intermittent explosive disorder, other neurodevelopmental disorders. But remember why ADHD is listed as a neurodevelopmental disorder. Specific learning disorder, intellectual disability, autism, reactive attachment, anxiety, PTSD, depressive disorders, bipolar disorders, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, substance use disorder, personality disorder. And I said I was going to read some, but I wanted to read more, and that wasn't all of them. Reason why I'm saying that is because in this section, it is indicating that what may be appearing as ADHD, meaning that a person can present with symptoms of ADHD. However, those symptoms can be mistaken for something else going on. Don't get wrapped up in the word disorder. Please understand that in context, the DSM is trying to help us understand that the symptom manifestation, the experience, the struggle that is often under the umbrella of ADHD can be a number of different things, a number of different reasons. Now, here's the difference. In this section, it says differential diagnosis. There's a later section called comorbidity. A lot of times, what's mixed in is people communicating that no, there's eight person has ADHD, and then they have this other stuff too, right? Like they have ADHD, this condition, this brain thing, and they may also have oppositional defiant disorder or anxiety disorder. But comorbidity under ADHD in the DSM is a whole different section. This is differential diagnosis, where it goes on to explain through many words in this section that no, ADHD, this can, what you are experiencing, licensed authorized professional, what you are seeing, what you are assessing, regardless of how extensive or fancy the tools may be, what you are experiencing may look like ADHD, but it can be something else, right? It can look like ADHD, but it can be something else. You know how something may look one way but be another way. You know how you've gone into that restaurant and you've gotten that steak and it looks so good and it looks so juicy and it looks so great. And then you bit into it and you're kind of like, well, what is this? Looks can be deceiving. You know, they got the comedians that's always talking about people going into the club, and I don't club. I'm married, and I'm done. I don't do that stuff. But sometimes people go into the club and they get with people and they come out, and maybe later on their looks and their character might be different. There's this term called catfishing. Now, catfishing to me is going out to the lake and getting something to eat, but I've heard that people are getting eaten up by people putting out information where maybe what it appears to be is not really what it is. You may have run into some of this stuff out there because there's a lot of stuff in this world that's purported to be one thing, but it's something totally different. And when it comes to important subjects like ADHD, we got to understand what is the accurate information. And when it comes to it, there's a lot of things the DSM is indicating that looks like ADHD, but it's not. That it takes great discernment. Even one of the things that it could be is behavior or reactions or actions from a child that actually can be considered consistent, believe it or not, with age and developmental level. Because we do not invest, we as society, we as the medical community do not invest in the understanding of children from the perspective of developmental level. We often don't understand that a lot of the struggles are actually consistent. Problematic, yes, but not inconsistent with age or developmental level. Because when we understand development, we can get away from the misapplication of disorder. It's not about whether a child has struggles or not, or how we might categorize it. It's about understanding what that means. And we'll look at it from the DSM. We have to understand that so many things can look like ADHD, but be different. Where we want to talk about that is because there's a blanket approach to ADHD often when it comes to kids. And here's just highlighting that we can't use a blanket approach. We've got to use incredible discernment, which I believe you have, and that's why we're here today. So, going back to another section in the DSM, let's look at, all right, here's one. There's a section called associated features in the DSM-5 TR. Let me find this section. Okay, associated features. Here's something. All right, this is one part of this. It reads, children with neurodevelopmental disorders with a known cause, example, Fragile X syndrome, 22q11 deletion syndrome, may often also have symptoms of inattention and impulsivity hyperactivity. They should they should receive a diagnosis. They should receive an ADHD diagnosis if their symptoms meet the full criteria for the disorder. Here again, there can be other things going on with a child that looks like ADHD, but may not. Now, if the symptoms meet the full criteria, then they can receive a diagnosis for ADHD. But how often do people or children are presenting with a few symptoms and they're lumped into that category of ADHD instead of the incredible discernment, instead of really being able to understand what may be going on? Also, it indicates here that there's a couple of disorders with a known cause. Fragile X syndrome, have you heard of that? 22q11 deletion syndrome, have you heard of that? I haven't. In over 25 years of clinical experience, I haven't heard of that except for in the DSM. But it's indicating that these challenges that we haven't really heard of have a known cause. But that's also indicating that this comprehensive challenge that we always hear about, ADHD, doesn't. Look that up. You'll often be able to see when you look up ADHD in several different sources, although it's attributed to the brain, it also indicates that the cause of ADHD is not known. Maybe we should think about that a little bit. Okay, let's go on in the DSM. All right, what else? Okay, genetic and is that what it reads? Hold on, let me see if this is correct. Oh yeah, okay. There's a section. So there's a section in the DSM-5-TR, risk and prognostic factors. There's a subsection, genetic and physiological. Let's get into this. Okay. I indicated last video we would get into something about genetics here. Okay. This is what this section reads. The hereditability, I can't say this word. The heritability of ADHD is approximately 74%. Large-scale genome-wide association studies, GWAS, have identified a number of loci enriched. Oh, okay, wait, let me read that differently. Have identified a number of loci enriched in evolutionary constrained genomic regions and loss of function genes, as well as around brain express regulatory regions. There is no single gene for ADHD. What is this saying? Okay, that this part really tripped me out in the DSM-5-TR. Why? Because that's a lot of words. Okay, all right. I don't want to read it again, but it's there. Anyway, you can rewind. I forget sometimes this video. This is not the old school thing. You can rewind. But the bottom line is that in this section, it indicates that, okay, they found stuff to be able to indicate that the heritability of ADHD is 74%. All right, let's examine this a little bit. First, I want to present this because I'm mind boggled a bit about this in the DSM-5-TR for a few reasons. Okay. One of the reasons I'm mind boggled about this from the DSM-5-TR is because this section, the wording is drastically different than the DSM-5. Okay. And when we look at the DSM-5, it's important that we get a chance to just examine this. Now, maybe you've already kind of stopped and said, well, there you go, AJ. We know that, when I say we, I'm really talking about society's view of ADHD being a genetic thing. It's like that's being pushed. But I really think we need to bring discernment to this as well. All right. Mm-hmm. Okay, let me find this in the DSM-5. Okay, here's what the DSM-5 reads. Under the same section, genetic and physiological, ADHD is elevated in the first degree biological relatives of individuals with ADHD. The heritability of ADHD is substantial. Here you go, like, duh, AJ, isn't that what we just looked at? Oh, let's go on. Okay. While specific genes have been correlated with ADHD, They are neither necessary nor sufficient causal factors. This DSM-5 reads different. It basically indicates, there's been a lot of indication of ADHD being genetic, and although there's strong high theories concerning that, there's really no actual thing that indicates that. There's nothing substantive that we can be able to communicate that really turns that from a theory into substantive, I don't say fact, but something substantive. But in the DSM-5 TR, there's a lot of words that says, yeah, ADHD is, well, it's actually interesting because it doesn't say, now it says large scale genome studies and all this stuff, but it also says there's no single gene of ADHD or for ADHD. So, and note here that the beginning sentence indicates the heritability of ADHD is 74%. Think about this with your discernment. Is it telling us that they have concluded that specific percentage to genetics or the heritability? Because the heritability often comes from, I believe, this is what I believe, okay? I believe the heritability comes from as we have become parents and as we have been told repeatedly about what ADHD is, as we adopt this belief of ADHD in ourselves and with our struggles, well, when parents then see their children having similar struggles, they pass on that belief. They see their child's struggles through that lens. And because they see their child struggles through that lens, they're already kind of taking off with that belief and they go down a path of ADHD often. This is not because people aren't intelligent, it's just the way that it is oftentimes. And because of this being the greatest phenomenon, this is really what is the heritability. It's just like when I see my child do something that's at 6 years old, that's reminiscent or exemplifies something that I've done or I do, I kind of automatically think, man, he's a chip off the old block. This is genetics. How is it that my child is doing the same thing that I've done or I do, and not even that it's been modeled? He's just kind of naturally have this be like me kind of thing. And that can bring pride or fear depending on your perspective about it. But the bottom line is, we don't really know for sure when it comes to genetics. That the genetic argument, the problem with it is that we don't know for sure. We can't look at something and be able to say, this is for sure genetics. Now, when your child looks like you, like my daughter did when she was a kid, now she's beautiful now. She doesn't look like me now, thank God. I mean, in some ways, but she's a beautiful woman of her own. The thing is, when she was a kid and she looked like me, you gotta say, okay, it's probably genetics because I mean, it's like a spitting image almost. She's a beautiful girl. Don't get that twisted. Okay. She was then too. That's what I'm saying. Okay. But the bottom line is, yeah, we can look at some things and say that's probably genetics. But when it comes to behavior or choices or actions or reactions, we really can't know for sure that it's genetic. So we got to be careful of the blanket distribution of the claim or the application of something being something when we're not sure. All right. That's what I'm saying. Could it be genetics? Yes. But to be able to hear over and over again, this is genetic, that's the problem because even though it indicates this in DSM about these, large genome wide association studies. Well, but there's no reference to what these studies are. There's no indication that we can look at to say, okay, well, where's this information coming from? Where's the basis of fact? How can we be able to vet these studies and look at it and really examine for ourselves and come to a conclusion? Again, we're told something in a way that's kind of confusing in how we're told, but okay, where's just the plain backing for it? And so all I'm indicating is that instead of just running with the narrative, examine this for yourself. Maybe look up these studies, but look at it with a critical discerning eye and see for yourself what you see. All right, let's go to this last section in the DSM that we're going to talk about today under ADHD and the DSM-5 TR. Diagnostic markers. And this is what this section reads. No biological marker. Let me take a little sip, please. Let me go back. Ooh, clear my throat on live. What am I doing? Thanks for bearing with me and my humanity here. Okay, diagnostic markers. No biologic marker is diagnostic for ADHD. Now, ADHD is supposed to be a biologic, a biochemical, a neurologic. That's whole. Okay, biologic. That whole thing is under the umbrella of biologic. Okay, ADHD is supposed to be a biologic phenomenon, essentially. However, there's no biologic marker that can be used to diagnose it. Although ADHD has been associated with elevated power of slow waves, 4-7 Hz theta, as well as decreased power of fast waves, 14-30 Hz beta, a later review found no differences in theta or beta power in either children or adults with ADHD relative to control subjects. So, at one time, they thought it had to do with these different waves or patterns, theta and beta. But then they kind of studied it further. Nope. Even though it was purported to have to do, or there were differences with these waves, there weren't. Although some neuroimaging studies have shown differences in children, please pay attention to this, if nothing else. Okay. Let me go back. Although some neuroimaging studies have shown differences in children with ADHD compared with control subjects, meta-analysis of all, the DSM does not emphasize many words, but in the DSM-5 and the DSM-5 TR, they emphasize this word all. Meta-analysis of all neuroimaging studies do not show differences between individuals with ADHD and control subjects. This is likely due to differences in diagnostic criteria, sample size, task used, and technical aspects of the neuroimaging technique. Until these issues are resolved, no form of neuroimaging can be used for diagnosis of ADHD. How many of you have been told, have seen, been taken, or involved with something, some kind of neuroimaging, and your child has been connected with a diagnosis, or a child has been connected with a diagnosis of ADHD because of it? Now, this again is not AJ McMahon. This is the DSM, the only source of diagnosis for ADHD, which indicates this section here. No biologic marker is diagnostic for ADHD. Can't find a biologic indication of it. Although some neuroimaging studies have shown differences in children with ADHD compared to control subjects, meta-analysis of all All neuroimaging studies do not show differences between individuals with ADHD and control subjects. Until these issues are resolved, no form of neuroimaging can be used for diagnosis of ADHD. So, what do we make of that? How do we look at the diagnostic criteria, and how do we look at what's being indicated concerning neuroimaging when it comes to ADHD? What do we do with that? Do we just dismiss another discrepancy, or do we think about what this means? Do we consider what this means for a child, any child, your child, that child? Are we willing to challenge ourselves beyond the narrative to look at accurate information and embrace what that might mean when it comes to our child? To understand the struggle is real, the symptoms are real. We're not here to talk about whether ADHD is real or not. The challenge, the struggle, the trials are real. However, there's so much more beyond that. There's so much more to looking at how we can understand children, not through the lens of ADHD, but we can use understanding children to then look at, well, what does ADHD mean for this child? What are these symptoms? What are these struggles? What do they mean? And how do we empower this child to overcome ADHD? Because it can be done, not just in some children, I believe, but I believe in, if not all, almost every child. And we get an opportunity to embrace this together, to walk through this together. And yes, it's very challenging. Yes, you may want to throw this out, but why? Why throw it out when we get an opportunity to just look at accurate information, to challenge ourselves, which would give us the opportunity to empower a child like never before? Thank you for joining me on this journey. Thank you for walking through the stumbles. We're going to stumble because this is not easy, but you're worth it. Your child is worth it. That child is worth it. So stay tuned, stay connected, stay involved. Please like and subscribe. Please stay tuned. Let me go over this medical disclaimer. The video content is for informational purposes and not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have. The video creator is not responsible for any loss or damage resulting from the use of the information. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard or seen in this video podcast. Use your wisdom, use your discernment, and let's continue this journey. Please stay tuned, stay involved, stay connected, and I'll see you next time.